Don, how many office jobs or day jobs have you had in your lifetime?
In my entire lifetime, let me see what kind of normal jobs did I have. When I was 17, when I was about 12, I had a paper route for a while. I used to deliver to neighborhood newspapers. When I was 17, I worked a month and a half in a greeting card and wrapping paper company in Chicago. And then I worked once during Christmas vacation for a month and a half for Follett's Book Company in Chicago, putting bins together and stocking shelves of books. And then when I moved to California as an adult, I had a girlfriend whose mother didn't believe that writing was a real job. So to impress the mother, I took a job at an advertising agency in the daytime, and then to make a little more money, I worked in a bookstore at night. So the only time I was home was when I was sleeping or in between the two jobs. And I think that was pretty much it. I don't think any of these jobs lasted more than about a month and a half.
Has it been your life's mission to not work a quote unquote day job?
Yeah, my life's mission really was not to work in a regular job. And I've been able to sustain myself all these years doing that because I'm so passionate about that, so furious about that, that I'll go to great lengths to network and make connections and take chances and risks and things. And it worked out for me, where most people would just take the easy way out and take the job at the supermarket or waiting tables in a restaurant or an office job or something like that. I couldn't do that. I couldn't work, 8 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, doing the same thing year after year, working for somebody I probably didn't like or respect anyway. So, yeah, I've made it a real point to survive without having to get a regular, normal job.
What if someone told you that they didn't think it was possible to make money as an artist for the rest of your life? Or maybe someone did tell you that.
Well, I grew up in Chicago. We were told that all the time. We were told that, you're going to be starving most of the time, and all these people with connections. I mean, I didn't have any connections in any of the businesses I got in, really. I knew a few people, like in the comic book business, but that was about it. My movie connections were all done, the hard way. I made amateur movies when I was a kid, and I kind of learned a lot of things about filmmaking by doing it. And because in those days there weren't any books that told you how to do it, you had to figure out how to edit and do special effects and makeup and all that kind of thing on your own. You had to make it up as you went along. And I learned a lot that way. But I was called by my high school once. They knew I was going to be in town, my high school in Chicago, if I would speak to the creative writing classes, the English classes. And I got up there and I was talking, and I pretty much made it a Q&A. And the only things anybody was interested in, like what kind of car I drove and did I go to parties and all this sort of thing. And finally one guy raised his hand, and this is right when Ronald Reagan got elected president. And he said, well, we know, we're from Illinois here. We know that none of us are ever going to get in the acting business or the writing business or the art business or become president. I said, well, the president you got right now is from Illinois. And there was silence after that. But yeah, my family, most of the people in my family didn't know till the day they died what I did for a living. I was the black sheep because I was the one without the job. And we would have like these Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas dinners. All the relatives would come over and we'd sit around the table, and people would start telling what their kids had done and what was new in their lives. And they would skip over me. They wouldn't even ask me what I was doing because they knew it wasn't anything they could relate to. And I was trying to make some points once with an uncle who was visiting us. We were sitting in the living room while everybody else was in the kitchen, and I had a new book that had just come out with my name on it as author. And I showed him, he said, what have you been doing lately? And I showed him this book. And he looked at it, and he looked at it, and finally he said, I am finally proud of you. You finally have a job. You work in a print shop. You are an apprentice printer. He couldn't understand that the words in that book I wrote. And I just, at that point, said, I'm not going to bother anymore with trying to impress people that just don't get it or don't want to get it.
How much of a creative career do you attribute to luck?
I attribute a lot of it to luck because, bad luck and good luck. I believe luck is simply taking advantage of or not taking advantage of a serendipitous situation that comes your way. And give you a couple examples. One is I used to be in the musicians union, and I used to play in a lot of rock and roll bands and things. That were, we played at weddings and parties and things like that, but never the big time, which is what I always wanted to be. I wanted to be a rock star. And a friend of mine happened to be at the musicians union reading the bulletin board. And he called me up when he got home and said, hey, I saw this notice on the bulletin board. Somebody is starting up a new band, and they're looking for a bass player. And he was a bass player. He said, I'm not going to bother with this. These things always turn out to be phony. Why don't you try? I said, well, give me the number. So I called up. It turned out to be a band that was, which a little bit down the road was produced by Michael Nesmith, who was one of the Monkees. And for 2 years, we were recording, doing albums, playing important gigs. And he resented me the rest of his life. He's dead now, but because I stole that from him. That's what he believed. I stole that job, that gig from him, that opportunity. Another time, I went down to I was living in an apartment building, and I went down to the mailbox to see if I had any mail. And as I was opening my mailbox, a woman walked by outside on the sidewalk. She stopped and she looked at me, and I had pretty long hair back then. And she said, are you 17? I said, no, I'm like 21 or so. I was pretty old already. And she said, well, I'm an agent. They're casting a TV commercial in an hour. Go to this address. Tell them you're 19. So I went down there. There's a whole line of young actors out there with their stage mothers, they're reading scripts and they're rehearsing, I went in there cold, didn't have any stage mother or agent with me. I just went in there cold, and I did the audition, and I got the gig, and it turned out to be for a union Breck hairspray commercial with Dick Clark.
Oh, wow.
And I lived off of that commercial for about 2 years. I just did it cold, and they liked the way I did it. But those are examples of just happening to be someplace. Now, if I had gone down to check my mail 10 minutes before or after, I wouldn't have known about it. If my friend hadn't have gone to the Musicians Union bulletin board and turned down the notice he saw on there, I wouldn't have known about that either. And that kind of thing happens to me all the time, but I'm a very social person. I get out, I network, I meet people, and a lot of times those people think about me and hire me for something. And they used to say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's not it either. It's who knows you. That's the important thing.
And it sounds like you're not afraid to take a chance. It sounds like you were willing to go out on a limb in case it didn't work out,
No, I've taken chances all my life, and I admire people who are risk takers. And I don't mean necessarily jumping off a building or something, to prove they're a stuntman, but who take business risks. They put their money into something that everybody else says is going to fail, but they know in their heart of hearts it's a solid thing, and even if it doesn't take off, they know they've done their due diligence, they've done their part, they've done their best to make it take off. And that's a great thing for me. Making movies isn't so much the money coming back, it's going through that experience of making the movie, seeing it all come together step by step by step, and hoping that it will be successful. But if it wasn't successful, wow, you had a great time during your life going through that process.
What do you tell someone who wants to be a full-time creator, but they think that they need their day job.
Well, I say to succeed at anything like this, the arts, let's say, acting, music, writing, whatever, you've got to give it your 100%. And that means you have to make yourself available during the day and at strange hours and things. And you have to learn how to tighten the belt. You have to learn how to starve for a while, in those lean years. Because if you don't, I had a friend who was a very good actor. He came out here from Indiana, and he was a good-looking guy. He had, he would have looked good on camera. He was a good actor, but he'd been brainwashed by the people back in Indiana. You got to have something to fall back on. So he took a job at a major studio. I won't say which one, but a major film studio, one of the major studios, in the security department. And he got really good at security, and he got promoted. And that's what he became, a security guard, because he couldn't turn the money down to steady work.
What's more important to a creative career, talent or an understanding of business?
John Milius used to tell me that surviving as a creative person, as a director or writer or something, it's 60%, I think it's 40% talent and 60% used car salesman. I think it's more like about 50-50. That's one mistake a lot of creative people make. They have no business sense. They don't know how to manage their money. They don't see a scam when it comes. I mean, I learned all these things the hard way, and sometimes teaming up with a business person. And that was very important. When I started my first film company, there were three of us. I had no business sense at all. Me, I was just, let's make the movie, let's go out there and do it. One partner was strictly business. He had no knowledge of or really interest in the movie business. He just wanted to make money. And the third was sort of a combination between the two of us. And we got along great. And he did all our contracts and everything, make sure we weren't getting cheated. And it was left to the other two to make the films and to turn them out. But I know so many creative people that are really, really good, and they don't know how to, keep their checkbooks organized, or they don't know how to, should we really go out to dinner in this expensive restaurant tonight when we have the electric bill tomorrow to pay, and they'll go to the dinner, and then they have no money. And I learned that a long time ago, how to be frugal, how to manage my money. Every morning when I get up, after my coffee is ready, I sit down at my computer, I check my email and everything, my social media, and then I check before that, even I check what I call my morning banking. I go to my website where I have my several accounts, make sure no money went out that I didn't know about and all that, because you make a mistake in your checkbook and then you get fined $10, $20, $30. And I know people that didn't care. They would just do that. They would pay the fines and go on their merry way. I got real paranoid about that when it hit me a few times. And I'm real cautious about my banking now. And so I think it's kind of a two-way street. The creative end, you put as much time and effort as you can into learning your craft and getting good at it. And the other thing is learn how to manage your money and what to do with it, and how to protect yourself in lean times. And now that I have my own production company, and I'm the only partner, I had to learn a lot of other things, things about licenses you have to pay for and all that kind of thing, and taxes you pay on certain things, but you got to learn those things. And some people think it's just nice to stay home and draw pictures all day or write stories all day, and that's not what it's all about. And one of the Dirty Harry movies where Clint Eastwood says a man's got to know his limitations, that was really important when that finally sunk in, because I could do a lot of things, and I wanted to do them all. And none of the things I was trying to do were going anywhere. And I looked at my friends who were successful, and they were all concentrating on the thing they did best. And once I learned that, a lot of doors opened up for me. I have 3 rules of life, frivolous though they may sound. One is, a man's got to know his limitations, Dirty Harry. Second is, if you can't deduct it, don't spend it. And you can't always do that, but a lot of times you can. And third, and this is very important, it's going to sound really stupid, but it can be applied to a lot of things. Remember the old mummy movies? The mummy is, and he's always, the guy always runs into a cul-de-sac or something, or stumbles or something, and gets killed by the mummy. Okay, the third rule, if you can't outrun the mummy, you deserve to get killed. Get yourself all hooked on drugs. You did that to yourself. Nobody forces, usually, to do that, except in horror movies, where they strap you down, they give you an injection. And I see so many people that destroy their lives on drugs or alcohol or whatever it is. They're not outrunning that mummy, And it's hard to feel sorry for them.
Should a new writer or artist begin as a hobbyist?
In my case, it started out as, my writing started out as kind of a hobby. And when I was like my late teens, fanzines were really popular. And these were usually mimeographed magazines that fans of horror films or comic books or science fiction or whatever the subject was would put out. And they would be fan written, and they would sell like for 25 cents or whatever. Now you can find copies of those, they're hundreds of dollars. But my writing career, right before that, I started writing for the high school paper, articles it was called The Scope. And from there, I saw other people putting out these fanzines, and I said, well, I can do something that good. And I did, and that got my name out there. And then I made friends with some of the people doing the monster movie magazines, and I started writing for one, and within one issue, I became the editor of that. And so, just one thing kind of built on what went before it. But I started out as a fan, like a fan of everything. I made fan movies and played in bands that were basically, garage, we call them garage bands now, but just fan bands. And that's the way you start out. And I think maybe most other people do too, In my case, I came from a musical background, so that really helped. And a lot of kids take piano lessons and play in the school bands. I did all of that sort of thing. And eventually you find, if you say, hey, I would like to do this professionally. And if you do, then you start taking it seriously and giving it your all. A lot of people don't, they just don't know that you can play and get paid for it. And that's what these creative jobs are. It's the difference in having a job where, like, you work a 9 to 5 somewhere, and you can't wait till it's over, till the weekend comes up, so you can go home and watch TV or go have a barbecue, whatever you do. My kind of work, you can't wait until it starts. And the sad part is when it's over, then you got to find something else to fill in the blank, fill in that spot, that slot, and continue working. Before we did this interview, I finished a comic book script that I wrote the first draft the day before, and I got the idea for it the night before. While I was watching TV, I got an idea for a story that came up with a title. I thought of a title, and then I slept on it, and the next morning I had the whole story in my head, and then I did my rough draft, and today I did my rewrite. I'm going to let it settle one more night in case I get another idea over while I'm sleeping or in the morning, and then I'll send it off. And that's the way I usually work those things. But I try to work as much as I can all the time. I try to be active as much as I can.
You say you're not happy unless you're creating?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, there's a difference between joy and happiness. So, to be really, truly happy, that's been a rare thing with me. But I get a lot of pleasure and a lot of joy when mostly when I'm working, yes. When I get the most joy, because what I'm most proud of, what I get the most pleasure and personal satisfaction, has nothing to do with making movies or writing or acting or these other things. It's the music. And I am more happy when I'm on a stage with a guitar and with a microphone, and there's a bunch of people out there, and they're kind of grooving on what I'm doing. And I miss those rock and roll days. I really do.
And the Penny Arcade released, they found some hidden tapes or?
Yeah, we were in the 60s, 66, 67. But then the Monkees got canceled, so Mike Nesmith didn't have we didn't have the money to sponsor us anymore and pay for our recording sessions and things. And he never got the deal he wanted with the record companies. We went to all the major record companies, and we were almost there, but the deal wasn't quite right. And then everything sort of fell apart, and I became a writer because I had to find the next thing I was good at, or competent at least, that I didn't have to really work at, and it was writing. And some opportunities came my way. But in more recent years, we become this legendary band that a few people knew of, a few more people heard of, but never heard our music or never heard us live. And a record company called Sunday's Music in New York found out about us. And through the efforts of Mike Stax, who has a magazine called Ugly Things, which is about old rock and roll bands, he interviewed me, put me in touch with some other people. I got in touch with the other band members, and they decided to put our music out. So they did a CD and a vinyl LP about 8 or 9 years ago. Now they're going to put out a double vinyl 33 1/3 LP set, 2 discs, one with all our official album material and the other with all our demos on it. And vinyl is coming back. People are buying vinyl albums again. So this is another exciting thing. And they found some more photos of us, which I didn't know existed. I never took photos. I thought it was always going to last forever, so I never got around to taking pictures. And so pictures have always been very scarce regarding the Penny Arcade. And so now we're going to be rock stars, sort of, in our old age. It's very exciting. But I'm glad people can hear the music and evaluate it,
Yeah.
On their own.
Yeah, it sounds great. It was on YouTube. It's kind of crossed between like the Yardbirds and I'm trying to think of
Buffalo Springfield were very influential.
Mm-hmm.
And because of Mike's involvement, there's a little bit of Monkees that creeps in there too.
Right.
But we had a variety. We had a variety of things. Some were hard rock, some were psychedelic, some were more on the countryside. But the Buffalo Springfield, I know, were kind of our idols back then. And of course the Beatles, Rolling Stones, that sort of thing.
Do you think people are afraid of personal failure or failure that their peers will see you as somehow deficient? Like it's one thing to be rejected and being told, sorry, what you said, the one publisher said, really, or whatever, thanks for trying. Yeah. And that hurts personally, but then...
But I took that as a funny, I saved it. I mean, I said sometimes I'm going to take all my old rejection slips and have them hard bound into a book, and that would be one of the ones in there. But a lot of people equate personal failure or personal rejection and failure with professional. If their novel is rejected, they take it as like a personal attack on them, something that they're inferior about it's I learned to take rejection so early on that I don't even think about it anymore. You throw enough darts at the target and one of them hits the fan. Well, now almost all of them hit the target. I get almost nothing rejected anymore. And of course I built up a reputation too, which helps. Every time you get your name on something, I remember what a thrill it was when I got my name on the first article I ever had published in a magazine, in a monster movie magazine. I read that article over and over again, and I showed it to all my friends.
You've said a lot of people turn down opportunities.
Well, first of all, a lot of people don't recognize an opportunity when it's staring them in the face. They just they just don't see it. And a lot of people turn down opportunities because they don't want to take a risk of failure. And I've known some writers and some artists. I knew one writer who wrote a novel, full novel. He sent it off to a publisher, and this was in the days when you could you didn't need an agent. You could send it just to the publisher, and you would get a response from the editor in person, personal response. And the editor rejected it, and the manuscript went in the desk drawer and never came out again. And a lot of people don't realize that they can be part of the professional world. And there's so many tricks I learned, again, the hard way, and also from advice from fellow writers and things, about when you send your material out. You try to, if you're sending out a novel, let's say, or a pitch of some sort, or even a headshot, you try to time it so it gets in the hands of the person that has to see it, either a Tuesday, Wednesday, or a Thursday, but not on a Monday or a Friday. Because psychologically, if it comes in on a Monday, the person had just come off the weekend, the editor, or the director, or the producer, and their mind is still maybe on the party they went to or whatever. And they come home and they don't have time for it. Or if it's the end of the week on a Friday, they're thinking of spending the weekend. So the stuff comes in, piles up, and they send it back. I was in New York trying to get more work in the comic book business. And in those days, it was difficult if you didn't live in New York, but you had to come in and have meetings. It wasn't like with the internet and everything today and email where you can do everything by remote. In those days, you had to go in for meetings and that sort of thing. So a friend of mine at Marvel Comics was having a party that weekend, and he said, "Would you like to come?" I said, "Sure." So I went to this party, and everybody there was in the comic book business. Writers, artists, letterers, colorists, and editors. And I struck up a long conversation with Denny O'Neil, who was an editor at DC Comics. And he said, "Oh, you're a writer. You're here probably to get work." I said, "Yeah, that's why I'm trying to drum up some work." So he said, "Why don't you come down to see me in the office on Monday morning when I get in? So, and bring down your whatever you have written to sell." So I went down there on Monday morning. Denny was there. We went into his office, and there was a stack of manila envelopes about this high on his desk. And he said, "What do you think those are?" I said, "Well, probably submissions that writers send in over the weekend." He said, "There could be a real masterpiece in there, but I don't have time to read all those." He gave them to his secretary and sent them back. Then he said to me, "What did you bring me?" And I sold those stories immediately. And that's when I realized the importance of personal contacts, networking, going out and meeting people, getting those people to like you and trust you enough to give you an assignment, or they do a sale, and also the timing of it. Now, sure, it was on a Monday. He looked at mine that came in on a Monday, but that's because I was there in person and we talked to each other at the party. But all the ones that came in through the mail and showed up on Monday, they got sent back, unopened.
And you went to the party, you took the chance.
Yeah, I took a chance to go to the party.
Right.
I know people that just never go to parties. Parties are socializing anyway. They just don't like it. And they don't believe that that sort of thing works. But it's always worked for me. I've had parties at my own house where all the people I invited most of the people were in one of the industries I was involved in. And there were deals being made at my parties between writers and editors and actors and directors and things, because they were all on a friendly, social, level playing field. And but a lot of people just don't want to believe that.
Don, why do you never turn down an invitation to a party?
Why don't I ever turn down an? Well, there's some parties I might turn down an invitation to. And being single again, besides the business opportunities, there might be some pretty girls there. There might be some great food there. Lesson number 4 in life: never eat before you go to a party, especially if you're on a budget, because there could be some great food there. If there's not, you're probably on a diet anyway, so it's good for your diet. Either way, you come out ahead. But I love social activities like that. I love meeting people. I love talking to people. Some people don't. Some people are homebodies. They'd rather say living in their parents' basement, looking at a computer screen or talking on the phone all day. And people really are starting to lose the ability to have conversations with one another. I look at these kids coming out of school sometimes, and they're all of them, there'll be a row of them all looking at their phones, texting, and they're probably texting each other in that row. I don't know, do people still go out on dates anymore? I don't know if they do, or is it just hooking up and hanging out and that sort of thing? I'm glad I grew up when I did. I went to the prom in a tuxedo with a beautiful girl.
Don, why do you say that you never plan to retire?
Well, I will retire if I get a flat on the freeway and I have to call the AAA and they come and they retire for me because I don't know how to do that. But I want to die working. I want to die in stir. Between the words action and cut, or falling over my computer keyboard or something like that, because I just love to work so much. I really do. And I have so many friends that are who are much younger than me and much longer ago than now, have just thrown in the towel. They're just resting on their past laurels. All they talk about is something they did, 40 years ago. And I don't want people to think I'm a has-been. In some ways, I'm doing more now than I did when I was in my 20s, And but a lot of people who did the same type of things I've done, they just don't. They don't do it anymore. They have no interest. They've taken day jobs. They work in stores and things like that. And I want to keep doing what I'm doing. I want to keep making movies and keep writing. I'm writing mostly comic books again now, which is the way I started out years ago. And from a magazine called Shudder, and another magazine called Vampirella Carmilla, and their horror stories. And I'm also the associate editor in those two magazines. And I'm having a ball. And they're better than any of the stories I wrote 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So I've improved, I'd like to think. And I just can't imagine spending the rest of my life watching flowers grow in the garden or watching television shows, That's just the way I am.
Do you think people get tired, or do you think they give up on their own ability?
Well, in the case of the arts, and I use that in a broad sense, making movies, writing stories, drawing pictures, acting, playing music, whatever. There is such a thing as age bias in these businesses. Like some of these places, when you're about some of the TV stations that had hired you as a story editor or something, or even a freelance script writer, figure after you're about 30 years old, you're all burned out with no new ideas. And a lot of people don't get to work anymore. When I became my own producer, my own production company, there's nobody to hire me. I do the hiring. So I can be 100 years old as long as I can still make a movie and get around the set. And, even if it's in a wheelchair or on a walker, I'm going to keep making, and have the money to do it, I'm going to keep making movies and keep writing stories. I mean, how much energy does it take sitting behind a keyboard going like this? You just got to come up with the ideas for the stories. And a lot of people don't. I see on Facebook, former writers, former artists, all they do is put up stuff they did 40 years ago. And I don't want to be known for that. I want to be known for what I'm doing now, too. Sure, I did some stuff in the past that got a lot of notoriety and got my name all over the place, but that's not all I ever did. And I think the things I'm doing now are better than the things I did years ago.
How do you set goals?
Well, in my case, there's two ways. One is I get an idea for something, and then I think about it, and then it starts to bug me a little bit. And, I got to do this. And then the next day I sit down and I start doing it. The goal could be a story or a novel, or it could be a movie, or it could be a song. But when I get the idea in my head, it's there. And sometimes it bugs me. I got to figure out how to do it. But then I do it, and I finish it. See, a lot of people will start something, but they can't finish it. Either they don't know how to finish it, or some people have told me it's too depressing to finish it because then it's over. With me, it's not depressing because then I think of something, time to think of something else, which is equally or maybe more exciting. The other way is somebody will call me up and say, Don, we need a such and such. We're going to pay this much money. Can you do it? That's my goal at that time. So either I come up with something on my own and it becomes a passionate thing with me, or it becomes something like a work for hire or something that I never would have thought of, but now I got to think about it and figure it out, or something that's really their idea, but I'm the one who brings it to life. So those are the two ways I usually do it. I don't know how other people do it.
Have you ever had trouble with discipline?
Discipline. Well, I was kind of a rowdy teenager. I had a lot of problem with discipline with the nuns in school and my mother and things. But you mean sitting down and actually doing it? No, I never have. I've never, that I can recall in my life, in my career, have what they call as writer's block. It might take an extra day to think of something, but eventually it comes. And it's funny, when I write these comic book scripts now, I write them in the afternoon. It takes me about 3 hours to knock out a comic. I'll tell you what the process is. I come up with a title. The title will be something, a famous expression, name of a product, something that I can twist around a little bit. I was watching something on the Alamo, and I remember the old expression. Remember the Alamo. Well, thinking in horror terms, like I do much of the time, I said, what about dismember the Alamo? You know, or what if then I come up with an ending? What kind of an ending can I come up with? A shock ending that ties in with that title. I still don't know where the story's going to be. I have no idea what the plot's going to be. And I say, what if before the final battle, they discovered that the Texicans, as they were called, were dying off, strangely, with their blood drained out of their bodies and pale skin and 2 marks on their neck. And nobody at the Alamo knows what a vampire is except this one peon who works there, who came from Spain, where they knew such a thing as El Vampiro, you know. Well, anyway, this whole thing turned out at the end, you know, and to the ending of the Battle of the Alamo, where Davy Crockett is swinging their rifle and all that, but a guy finds the skull of the vampire with the fangs on it that they just destroyed by Davy driving Jim Bowie's Bowie knife into his heart. And I mean, it's very complicated, but that's how it comes out. So then I write that out. And I know the ending, I know the title. I start writing the first page. I still don't know exactly how the story is going to go, but it just comes together and it comes out in 6 pages, okay? Now it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I make something to eat, and I eat. Then that night I watch something on TV, maybe a movie or something. During the movie, I get all kinds of ideas for tweaking the story, a little bit here, a little bit there. What if I change this word to that word? Then I sleep on it. The next morning, I rewrite the whole thing. And then I let it sit. And I sleep on it one more night in case I get any more little subtleties or innuendos or whatever. And then it's done, and I send it off. But it always starts out with a title. I never have trouble going through the whole process and finishing it. But I have other friends who can't do that. They halfway through, or when they get towards the end, they end it, and they don't finish it because it puts finality on something. And a lot of people are afraid to finish it because somebody then, besides themselves, is going to have to read it and judge it and decide whether to buy it or not to buy it. And they can't take that because they take a rejection as a personal attack or rejection of themselves, their own self-worth as a person. I got rejection rolled off my back because when I first started, I got some rejection deservedly earned rejection slips you wouldn't believe. I got one that just said, "We admire your persistence, Mr. Glut, but come now." And it almost destroyed me at the time, but I got so many of those, it just kind of rolled off the back. And I learned, being in a position where I hire people myself, reasons why people get rejected that have nothing to do with the quality of their work or their worth as a human being. One is what I said before: if it comes in, you have your meeting on a Monday or a Friday. But what if you have a meeting, you walk in the office, you're going to be hired as a writer, let's say, by a story editor or a publisher or whatever, and you just happen to look like the girlfriend he had a bad argument with that morning or that night before, and that's all he sees, and he doesn't hire you. Or you're a movie casting director, and you already hired a 6-foot-tall leading lady with red hair. And then a guy comes in to audition for a leading man role, and he's 5'7" with flaming red hair. You're not going to put those two people together. It'd be ridiculous. Or in my case, when I was casting my first movie, an actress came in who looked like she could be the twin sister of somebody we already hired. And that confuses people. And a lot of creative people have to learn that those are reasons why they're turned down in many cases.
In what ways do people ruin their careers before they start?
Well, one way they ruin their career is they don't realize that there is a career that they could have. Again, like when I grew up, we had college day at high school, and when your senior year, and they had all the people they come in the study hall room, and they would pitch the colleges that were kind of local within, not too far from Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and things like that. And they would get up there and they would say, well, our school is the best for engineering, and blah, 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 blah. Well, our school is the best for physics, and blah, blah. And I would sit there, I don't want to do any of those things, and I didn't know there was such a thing as USC Film School. So I never, if some opportunities hadn't come my way that told me about it, USC Film School, I never would have known about it, and I would have been stuck in Chicago like most of my friends were. And, or else, again, they don't want to put their talent on the line, their butts on the line, and risk being rejected or not making any connections or anything, They should just stay home and think the phone's going to magically ring. And, well, it doesn't, except in my case, sometimes. So they just don't know they can do it. It's a fantasy world for them. Like when I spoke before my high school. And then my high school, a few years later, when I had some books that were really well known and everything, and I had a movie behind me and everything, they called me up and they wanted me to give the valedictorian speech. And I said, well, okay. We'll pay your way to Chicago, and I had family there. I said, okay, I'll give me an excuse to see my mother and cousins and friends again. Okay, I'll do it under these conditions. When I give a speech, I don't write it out. I make little cue cards, and I do it off the cuff, like I'm speaking now, and like I used to speak in those seminars for actors. And a key word sort of sparks off a topic and some dialogue. And the second is I don't want to wear a cap and gown. I think that looks stupid. So, okay, they agreed to that. My mother, of course, was horrified, thinking I was going to say all kinds of things to get even with the nuns, And so it was a Catholic school, so they had it in the big church. And I was going to do it from the pulpit. Well, I'd never been on a pulpit before. And so first thing, I'm walking down there completely dressed in black, looking more like a hitman than a guy giving a valedictorian speech. First thing I did was these steps that led up to the altar area from the regular, where the people go, and I tripped, stumbled. I almost fell on my face. So that got a laugh. So I walked up to the pulpit. I looked out there and all these seniors out there. And I thought, if I could just move one person to pursue their dreams. And so the first thing I said, trying to get a reaction out of the audience, I said, this is the first time I've ever been up, spoken from a pulpit before in a church. My first inclination is to go out there and take up a collection. Nobody, it was just like silence. And I tried one more thing, follow up, again, silence. So I basically gave them the speech, but tailored to a broader audience, that I gave for the actors at those seminars. And nobody reacted at all. And one of the things I said that I'm sure got me into trouble was, we were always taught when I went to school that you had to go to college and get a college education. And I said, nobody yet has even asked me, business-wise or getting a job, if I've even went to high school, let alone college. And I said, again, it was a Catholic school. And I said, one piece of advice, if you really have a talent for doing something, you're going to have to take a risk. You're going to have to tighten the belt. You got to know how much toilet paper and kitty litter to get, but you got to be able to tighten the belt. I suggest don't get married too soon, because once you have kids, everything changes. You can't tell your kid you can't get a new pair of pants or whatever, Well, afterwards, the only thing anybody said to me was, thank you for coming so far and talking. That was somebody in one of the faculty. And one of the students asked me to sign a book, autograph a book. That was it. And I realized that I probably didn't touch one person there. I mean, maybe, but I was telling them about, at my age being in recording studios, doing rock and roll songs, and I was still recording music then, that I would put that in my movies. So when they play, and then when they play on television, BMI would send me a royalty. One of the things I learned as a businessman. Well, that's the reason I recorded the songs. I recorded the songs. Another opportunity came my way to make music videos if we had the songs, because they're all dinosaur related. And then I had an opportunity to make a movie which had dinosaurs in it. And I put in some of my songs in that, including a musical number. And one of the actresses in it turned out to be a choreographer, which I didn't know. So she choreographed. It goes on and on. She wasn't afraid to hold a boa constrictor, which I had as a pet. All these things get so interrelated and convoluted.
How do you know someone is serious about working in the entertainment industry? What is it about the way they present themselves, how they interact with you, where you can tell that they're serious?
Attitude has so much to do with it. In the old days, I used to do seminars for actors. This is back in the 80s and 90s. And I would tell them how to network and how to make connections and mistakes they were making that were preventing them from getting work. And they always came in with headshots that they gave you. And stapled on the back of headshots was their resume. And it told, and a lot of it was fake. They would, if they said featured role, that usually meant extra work. Featured role means something totally different. And at the bottom it said special skills. That's what I always looked at first, because it would say, able to play a trombone, not afraid to handle a boa constrictor, things like that. That would tell me something about the people. And so I met a lot of actors that way. But when they came into the office, two things would really be a turnoff to me: forgetting what their talents were or what day of the week it was. One thing is, if they came in with an attitude like, "Hey, dude, how you doing?" I hate being called dude, and that's right away is the kiss of death. Or if they come in and they don't look like the headshot. There were people who would come in, the headshot would be somebody, a very conservative-looking business suit and everything, haircut and everything. They're looking like they're going to sell you an insurance policy. Then the person that walks in has got multiple tattoos and piercings and his hair is all weirded out. You got to look like your headshot. Or a lot of women use headshots that are 10 and 20 years old, you know? When I was doing my early movies with my first production company, one of my business partners in the production company, and I used to do the auditions. And we would, people, we would put our notices out and we would be flooded with actors. They would come in. And we would pay for their parking in the parking lot, validate their parking. And they would come in, and very few of them looked like their headshots. But my partner, who is a much more nice guy than I am, or was, would insist on giving them a full audition and asking them all. And we would waste like a half hour or more and pay for the parking for people we knew from the moment they walked in the lobby of our office that we weren't going to use, that we weren't interested in. They were too old, they were too fat, they just didn't look like the headshot that came in. So I got real strict when I got my own production company and had nobody to share opinions with, and I made sure that if they didn't look like the headshot, we would just say, well, we're already booked up, and we just send them home. And then that we did the auditions in places where you could park on the street. And if they had to park in a lot, I never offered to pay for them, because they weren't giving us the opportunity, the job. We were giving it to them. They could at least pay for their own parking.
You were interviewing people for a film that you were casting or putting together for crew?
Through showing off for a distributor's party. And in it, the movie was an odd movie, but at the end there was this incredible chase scene between a guy on a horse and a cop on a motorcycle. And they were shooting guns at each other, and it went on for a long time, but it was so imaginative, and I thought, I never saw a chase in a movie between a guy on a motorcycle and a guy on a horse. Whatever gave him that idea? And I asked, after the screening, I went up to Ray, who directed, I said, whatever gave you that incredible idea? And he said, well, I knew a guy with a motorcycle, and I knew somebody else with a horse. And that has opened up so many doors for me. And you put something like that on the screen, it increases your production value so much, because it looks like it was all thought out, and it was just something that you made up on the spot.
Interesting.
And took advantage of something that was already there. And that's why it's so important to me when I was reading those on the back of the headshots, these special skills and abilities. I found out things that I could put in my movie that would make my movie look better and more expensive.
Why did you stop making movies at 25, Don?
I never stopped making movies at 25. I stopped making amateur movies at around 21, 22. I was just getting tired of it, and I was moving into the rock and roll business. And I made a couple during that period, but I figured it was time to make a real movie, or stop making these home movies, basically. And then I got sidetracked because I had a lot of bad experiences at USC. And when I got out, instead of going into the movies or trying to get into the movies, the Mike Nesmith thing opportunity came my way, and I went with that. And that was one of the greatest times of my life. And so when that ended, I had kind of given up making movies because it was a young person's business, and I didn't have any connections in the business. But an opportunity came my way. One of the people that would become one of my business partners in my first production company was doing these cable access television shows. And he wanted to know if I would like to do one. I said, how about a talk show on dinosaurs? Because I love dinosaurs. I could have a guest paleontologist. I would have a guest special effects guy. We'd promote movies. I'd have an attractive co-hostess, and he said, okay. But the sample he showed me had a really lame piece of music. I don't want to have, that's embarrassing having that music. I can write my own song, and I can get another musician friend of mine. We can record all the tracks, and we'll have a theme song. So we did it. The show lasted 3 episodes, and we had a theme song. But the show, nobody watched it because it was cable access. So that's what we had. We had a tape of tapes of 3 shows with this one song on it. And then he came up to me one day. He said, I got an idea. I'm not doing those cable accessing shows. I'm doing music videos. I'm doing like half-hour shows with maybe 6 songs, 6 music videos that are sort of instructional. Can you come up with any more dinosaur songs? So the button was pushed, the challenge was there, the gauntlet was thrown, the wheels started turning, and I called my music partner up and I said, we can do, let's do an album, let's do a whole album. And so the whole plan was my friend was going to do 2 sets of 6 songs apiece. And the director who was going to direct them flaked out. So he said, I got bad news, Jim. We got the songs, but we don't have a director. So I'm pulling the plug on this. I said, wait a minute. Let me try directing. If it doesn't work out, you can tell if it's not working out, then I'll walk. But if they work out, because he didn't understand the songs, the first director. He didn't get it. And because they were all about paleontology. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So it worked out fine. And I ended up doing a couple documentaries with the same guy who would become my business partner. Did one on dinosaur movies and one on ape movies. And called me up one day. He said, hey, I have a deal with the Playboy Channel that we can make these sexy science fiction movies. How would you like to direct one? I said, well, why would I like to direct a movie? And I didn't know if I could. I was already turning 50 years old. Most of my friends my age were already out of the business. I said, you bet. So we made that first movie, which led to several more, and that was the opportunity. And I met the guy who started the whole thing. His name is Kevin Glover. I met him. We were both members of a group called the Count Dracula Society, which is mostly a bunch of fans who gave awards and watched movies and met professionals and things, guest speakers. And I met Kevin there, and he found out I was making amateur movies as a kid. So he said, would you like to show those amateur movies to a group? So we did. He organized a group. It was at a bank somewhere one night. And that's how I got to be friends with Kevin. And that's when Kevin mentioned to me these cable access shows. So it was just one thing leading to another. I joined the Count Dracula Society. That became an opportunity to meet people. So I met Kevin at the Count Dracula Society. And that's when he pitched the idea to do a cable TV show, to show my amateur movies. And there was that screening of the amateur movies, he pitched the idea, he mentioned to me about doing a cable access show. That led to the song, which led to the music videos, which led to a couple documentaries, which then segued into that first movie, which is called Dinosaur Valley Girls. That's how these things work with me. But the opportunity was joining the Count Dracula Society and having to pay a dues and all that. But I got to meet a lot of celebrities there and everything.
Did you really spend 9 or 10 years in your 40s trying to raise money for a film?
No, I tried raising money. The first time I tried to raise money for anything was I was in my 50s already. And nobody wants to give any money. Because if they're a professional investor and they know what they're doing, they're not going to invest in a movie. But they don't want to take a risk. And a movie is the highest risk venture you can get into. So you would have to I found that the most likely people to invest in a movie were people who loved movies and all their life, secretly or not too secretly, wanted to be a part of a movie, but never had the chance or pass up the chance. People that had big film collections in their basements. People used to play in rock and roll bands and they miss performing in front of a group. Other people just want to meet the pretty girls, actresses at the parties. But almost every time, and this is, we're raising like $500 or $200 or $1,000 maybe, that at the very last minute, they would live the life up until that point when they had to write the check. When they had to write the check, then it was a different story. then somebody, their husband or wife or their business manager or best friend, would tell them that it's a risk. And in one case, we had a guy who I talked to in Chicago when I was there, and 6 months later he was coming to Los Angeles. So we really did our homework. We did offices with storyboard art on the wall and actors' photos and things. The night before, he called me up and he said, "I'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'm really excited about this." Next morning at 9 o'clock, my wife said I can't do it. Another time, we did a whole dog and pony show right here in my house. We had a party for this one guy from the Middle East. He came in, and he was really excited. And I had girls dressed as sexy cave girls in fur bikinis, and we had food, we had drinks. I had a videotape I put together that went for hours of nothing but clips from dinosaur movies. And he was all jazzed. And the next day he decided, no, I think this money, I'm going to invest this money in property in Malibu or Santa Monica or somewhere, which about a week later all went down in a flood. So he lost everything. So I found out that these people, the big talkers with the big bankrolls, they're the least likely people to put money in. And so what I did after spending over a decade beating my head against the wall, trying to get people to put money in movies, and sometimes, like I knew Jurassic Park was in 1994. I knew Jurassic Park was around the corner. I had a friend who ran ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, and he was telling me what a big thing this was going to be, and I knew everything was going to go dinosaur. Roger Corman, who knew, made a cheap movie called Carnosaur, which ironically I got to work on as a dinosaur consultant. And Corman made this movie for like, I don't know, $10 million. He put it out a week before Jurassic Park when everybody was already primed up for a dinosaur movie. And it made 10 times its money back in about a week. I'm still trying to raise money for my dinosaur film, which finally came out like 2 years later. And we'd missed the boat. Because everybody I said Jurassic Park to, they looked at me like I was crazy. What is that? Jurassic, what is that? And so the people I knew weren't the people that were likely then to put money into it. And then the people that did put money into it, a lot of them didn't understand that it was a risk and thought they were going to become instant millionaires, which never happened, and threatened us with lawsuits and called us up at all hours of the morning, all hours of the night. And finally, after making 6 movies, going through that process, I was at my high school reunion in Chicago, and I was thinking, I want to make another movie. I can't let another year go by without making another movie. I'm not getting any younger, whatever. But I got this huge comic book collection with things like first issues of Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. I don't care about those comics anymore. I never look at them. They're just sitting on a shelf. I sold them all. I raised enough money to finance my own movie. And that's what I did from that point on. I financed 2 movies now. I have no investors to annoy me or who don't understand the contract, which they never read. Or, I can do it on my own. I don't have any business partners. I don't have to argue with what I think is going to be the next genre around the next trend around the corner. And everything worked out nice. So if the movie makes its money back, I don't have to share it with anybody. If it bombs, I don't have anybody to answer to. But I still had that wonderful experience of making a movie, seeing it all come together, one step by the next step. Seeing it all come, when you start out, you got an idea in your head. You can see the movie in your head. When it's all done, you can see it on the screen. And how close what you're seeing, what you're watching, resembles what you originally imagined. And if it's close or even halfway close, that's a great rush. That's a great feeling.
So you felt that no one would take you seriously at 50 or after?
No, that's what I thought. Because I was on a mountaintop. We were scouting locations for Dinosaur Valley Girls. I was at mountaintop looking down into the valley. And besides that, I thought, at my age, am I going to be physically able to do this? I'm going to be running up and down hills and climbing and all this sort of thing and shooting 13, 14, maybe 15 hours a day. Can I do this? Will I survive it? And I survived it just fine, with a lot of movies after that.
What do you say to someone who worries that they have to make a movie before age 30?
I tell them, look at my website and you'll see 8 of them that I made after 50. And if I had the money now, I would be shooting a movie right now. I got 2 scripts ready to go, but I can't make a movie like some of these people where they make a movie for $500 in their backyard and call that a movie shot on videotape. I spend at least $150,000 when I make a movie. I hire SAG actors, pay them SAG wages and all that. We pay for permits when we have to. I do it the right way, but they're still low budget, and we try to make them look like they cost $1 million. But I think that's an excuse. You know, I think when people say, nobody's going to buy my story anymore, take me. I mean, the studios might not. If you're going through the studio system, whether you're writing for television or for movies, yeah, then you have a big worry, because they want to have not only people that they think have not been burnt out as far as their ideas go, they also want people that look good. I don't mean necessarily handsome or beautiful, but look sharp. They aren't, drastically overweight. They don't dress sloppy, because it's a cosmetic business. When people walk through those corridors and they look in the window, look through the door, seeing somebody running the Xerox machine or behind a desk, they want somebody that looks young and sharp. You see a lot of attractive women, a lot of handsome men in those places, dressed nicely, And that's one thing they should consider, their own personal appearance because they say, and it's very true, I think, first impressions are lasting. Think of how many friends you have that are 40 years old, that you've known since you were a kid, and they call you up on the phone, and the first image that pops into your mind is them as that little kid. That happens to me all the time. And so those first impressions are really, really important.
How do you start writing a comic book?
I usually come up with the title first. But like this was last night, I got a email from a publisher friend of mine who says he's starting up a new comic, and he has a cover illustration. Can I write a story in 5 pages based on that cover illustration? So then I got to figure it out. And there's certain things he wants in that story. I won't say what they are because maybe somebody else will run with the story. But certain story elements. So I got to figure out how to fit those story elements into a 5-page story that includes the cover. When I write these stories for these magazines I regularly write for now, Shudder and Vampirella Carmilla, frequently the artist will get a hold of a great cover painting that he wants to use. And he calls me up and says, can you write a story based on this cover? And sometimes the cover has a lot of image. For instance, there was recently, he sent me one with it was a headsman, an executioner. And the headsman was holding a certain kind of axe. And he was standing like on a pillar or a mountain of human skulls. And there were a couple other things. Might have had a full moon or something. And it had a title. And the title wasn't some generic title that would fit, like Curse of the Mummy will fit anything with a mummy in it. Blood of the Vampire will fit any vampire story. But this one had a very specific title that couldn't be changed because he needed a title for it to get in a certain catalog that distributes the magazines. So I had to come up with a story that came up with that executioner, that particular type of weapon he was using to cut the heads off. All those skulls, might have had a full moon too, if I can remember, and that title. So I sleep on it, and mull it over when I'm walking around or driving a car or watching TV or something, I keep mulling those things around, and sooner or later it comes together. And then it comes up with a last panel. And the last panel in a horror story has to be a shock of some sort, a surprise. If you're doing a superhero story and it's an end, if it's a complete story in itself, you need an ending where everything is resolved. The bad guy is caught or whatever, you know. But if it's a continued story into the next issue, then it needs some kind of a shock or some kind of a surprise. All those things have to be taken into account. But to me, that's easy because that's where my strong points lay.
What is the structure of a comic book?
A structure, well, it's the first thing you have to remember is a comic book is visual. It can't be a bunch of talking heads. I mean, you can do it that way, but people are going to get bored with it. It needs to be visual. It's pictures. And the panels, there should be some kind of and not, a lot of artists can't do this. A lot of artists can only do nice like portraits and things and landscapes. But telling a story from one panel to the next, continuity from one panel to the next, is a whole talent in itself. And then the words, the captions, the dialogue shouldn't repeat what you see in the picture. You know, I make the joke. I saw a panel in a science fiction comic book once. The picture showed a spaceship landing on a planet. Then there's a caption at the top of the panel that said, "As the spaceship lands on the planet, ... And then there's a dialogue balloon coming out of the spaceship, like somebody in the spaceship talking. "We are landing on the planet on our spaceship." You know, triple threat redundancy there. If you're landing on the planet, you don't have to say they're landing on the planet. And that's something a lot of writers don't know or can't figure out. When I was working for Russ Manning on Tarzan, he said, and I was making that mistake. I was being redundant in my panel. He said, no, that's not the way you do it. And I learned a lot from Russ as far as writing comic books are concerned. He said, but he wanted the panels to be, quote, dense with information, unquote. So when you look at that panel, you're seeing the action, but something in the panel tells you something different in addition to what you're seeing in the action. Or in the dialogue will use a word or two. It's surprising how much information you can put in one comic book panel. Just if a character is doing something, you can see what that character is doing something. You don't have to say it in the caption or have the character say what he or she is doing. But in the character's expression or body language, you can say a lot more. You can like they're doing this unwillingly, or they're being forced to do it, or they're not taking it seriously. So you've already given a second piece of information. And if it's, let's say, a scene where there's mountains in the back and the sun is setting, and it has whatever the character is doing has something to do with light, like it's a vampire trying to get to his coffin. If you're as the sun's rising anyway, you know that he's in a hurry because any minute the sun's going to come up and destroy him. So in that one panel, you can three bits of information that are unrelated to each other, and that's the way I like to do my stories.
Do you use the same formula for every comic book?
I'm doing the same format now for the ones I'm doing for Shudder and Vampirella Carmilla, because they have a house look, and the way I started, the ones I submitted, they were accepted with no problems. And the reason was, when I first started out, I said, how do you want me to submit my stories? The Marvel style, where you go to the artwork first, or whatever. He said, just write a script, a full script. And that's what I do, and they've been accepting everyone. They've been fine ever since. But if I was writing I did a graphic novel based on my movie Tales of Frankenstein, and I had 5 artists working on it, 5 different artists. And I asked each one, how do you want me to do it? With the exception of one, all of them wanted to do Marvel style. So what I did with them, I wrote a basic synopsis. I sent them the movie script that we shot for the film, and then I sent them some photographs of the actors playing those parts. And they did a beautiful job, a wonderful job.
How much description do you write?
Well, if you're writing a character that's well known, like I have with Tarzan, Captain America, Vampirella, or whoever, there's a house look. Everybody knows what they look like. I don't have to describe them at all. Sometimes I'll go into great detail if it's an unusual character, a strange hunchback with one eye or a peg leg and 2 colors hair or something, Then I'll describe all that if it's for a special purpose. At other times, I'll just say, let's get some diversity in the story, make some people African American, make some Caucasian, make some Asian, and let them just go wild with it. If there's certain kind of clothes, like if it's a sexy young woman, I'll say, have her wear, like a mini skirt or shorts or a halter top, or, something like that. Or if it's a Western story, I do a lot of Westerns that are horror stories. I'll say, make sure that the guns don't look like a Hollywood gun, or sometimes I make sure they do look like a Hollywood gun belt. Or in some cases, I've used historical figures. I love using historical characters. I've used Jesse James, Frank Nitti, Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, and I'll say, look up online. You'll see photos of the way they looked. So sometimes the description is very precise. Sometimes it's very general. And sometimes it's non-existent, really.
How do you keep the reader turning the page?
That's a great question, and a lot of writers and artists don't know this either. And again, I learned this from Russ Manning. And when an artist changes the arrangement of my panels, I go berserk, because their pages are designed to make you turn the page. The last panel on every right-hand page, you open the book up, and you have a right-hand page and a left-hand page. The right-hand page, the last panel, should either be something surprising, a shock, or a total scene change. So the whole page is about somebody out in the forest. The last panel is a castle. And then you go into your castle scene. That makes them want to see what's on the next page. Or it's the guy walking through the forest, and the last page is looking in terror. What is he terrified about? You turn the page, it's a werewolf attacking him, lunging for him. Or it's simply somebody, like in the story I just finished today, somebody's being stalked, and the last panel is them getting clubbed over the head. They don't know they're being stalked. Last panel is a close-up, clubbed over the head from behind with a beer bottle and knocked out cold. Those are the ways you end the page.
So it all has to fall on the right page.
Yes, or it should, ideally, but a lot of people don't do that. They don't know that.
How do you write cliffhangers?
A cliffhanger is just, in my younger years and when I was a kid, I saw a lot of old movie serials where at the end of everyone was like 12 or 15 chapters long, and at the end of the chapter, the car goes off the cliff. Or a building, they get trapped in a building, the building explodes. And I wrote novels that way, using those types of cliffhangers. Of course, then you got to figure out how to you're going to get your hero out of those situations. And there was an old story that there was a writer who wrote pulp magazines, who was a notorious drunk. And he would write the stories, and then but he always did the job. And there was this one thing where the hero got caught in quicksand. It was sinking in the quicksand. And these magazines were published like on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and they're getting close to the deadline. And they didn't have an ending. They didn't know how the next story was going to begin and how he's going to get out of the quicksand. So the writer finally showed up, and he was drunk out of his mind. And he staggers into the office, and he sits down behind a typewriter, puts a piece of paper in, cranks it up, and he starts typing. And he types the whole chapter out. And then he walks out of the room, walks out of the office. So they went and they grabbed the story out of there because they're going to go to the printer. And just started off with him saying, after Buck got out of the quicksand, and then he went into the rest of the story. So he never told you how he got out of it. And I don't know if that's a true story, but it's a famous story that's been going around for decades with pulp writers. And I consider myself in many ways a pulp writer. But I did a story once where the hero got locked in a safe at the end of the chapter. The next then the crooks come up to the safe, who know the combination. They open up the safe and they shoot machine guns into the safe. That's how it ended. I had to figure out a way of getting him out of the safe. And there's the old cliche line, well, safes, it's a secret. Safes are meant to be broken, not to be broken into, not to be, so you couldn't break into them, but not break out of them. But that wasn't good enough. So I have a friend in New Jersey who used to be an escape artist. And I called him up, I got his voicemail, and I said, I'm not asking you to give me away any trade secrets, but I got my hero locked in a safe. How am I going to get him out of it so he doesn't get machine gunned? The day went by, and then at 2 a.m., he's a real night owl, especially when you think it's 3 years later in New Jersey. I was screening my calls, and I get this voice laughing his head off. He couldn't control himself. And I knew what it was, so I picked up the phone, and he said, nobody has ever asked me this question. Get a pencil, and this is how you do it. And in the story, I had the hero getting out of the safe. He said, what brand is it? And we worked all that out. So I ended up dedicating the novel to him. And I said, to Jim Steranko, who told me how to get my hero out of the safe. And that's a way how I worked out that cliffhanger. Usually I use in prose fiction, I use the standard ways they got out of them in the old movie serials. Jump out of the car at the last moment, jump out of the window of the building just seconds before it blows up, and that kind of thing. But the safe one was really something.
Sorry, just one last thing. What is a pulp writer? Can you define that?
Oh, a pulp writer was a writer who wrote for had a little different meaning now, but originally was a writer who wrote for the pulp magazines, usually very fast, very cheaply. He got paid maybe a penny or a half a cent a word, or maybe a quarter of a cent a word, and he knocked these things out. They were usually very lurid. They had very lurid covers. They had titles like Weird Tales, Black Mask magazines, Startling Terror. I mean, things that comic books used years later. And the stories were always really improbable. But, like Tarzan and Fu Manchu, they all got their start in the pulp magazines. In later years, the pulp writers turned basically to paperbacks. And they wrote some of the early science fiction stories, but also things like Doc Savage, the Spider, the Shadow. And I've written a lot of Frankenstein novels, The New Adventures of Frankenstein. I wrote 12 of them. And they're always with a lot of action, a lot of mad scientists and pretty heroines and sadistic fiends and mad doctors and monsters. And so I consider myself a pulp writer. In fact, I did one in the last few years about basically a masked character who put a mask on it called Jawbreaker. And he gets his name because he hits a crook and he says he broke my jaw. Hey, that's a good name for myself. That's where that name comes from. But he got into all the old kind of fights and chases and cliffhangers.
How many written pages is a comic book?
Well, comic books can be any length. In the old days, most of the filler stories, like in Action Comics, you would have action. Superman would have the long story, and then in the back it would be Zatara the Magician and Congo Bill, who was sort of like Jungle Jim, and Vigilante, who was a Western character, and they were usually about 5 pages long. Then they been expanded to, like, when I was working writing a lot of stories for Marvel, I think the stories were maybe 17 pages long. When I worked at Gold Key, the full-length books were 25 pages long, but the filler stories were 10 pages long. The stories I'm writing now generally are the ones for Shudder and Vampirella Carmilla magazines. And those, even though some of the other writers write them in 5 pages, I write them in 6 pages. I found out with my own writing experience that 6 pages is ideal for telling a short horror story that has a surprise ending. The ones I was doing for Gold Key were the 10 pages. And thinking back now, I think they were probably a little bit longer than they needed to be. And I have a little bit of difficulty cramming everything in the 5 pages, even though I've done it for the same company, because the artist only was available for 5 pages. But then we have what they call graphic novels that can be 60-some pages long, and all done by the same writer and the same artist, telling one long story. I've done some of those too. And but I'm real comfortable now and have a really good time writing these 6-page horror stories.
Can you clarify what you mean by pages?
Yeah, by a page, I mean a printed page. What you see on the page when you buy the magazine. So one comic book page of script might be half a page long, or it might be 2 pages long. It really just depends what you're trying to say and how much you have to describe. And sometimes you have a page with no dialogue for you're trying to make some kind of a dramatic point. So it has more impact if you just show the artwork or maybe a sound effect here there, and you can do that on a quarter of a page, you know. Panel 1, long wide shot of heroes fighting. Panel 2, tighter shot. Panel 3, close-up fist hitting face. You can do that in a page or less.
How long does it take you to write a comic book?
The ones I'm writing now, the 6-pagers, it takes me about 3 to 4 hours to do the first draft, which then I tinker with, well, in the evening, adding a word, changing a word here and there. The next day I do a rewrite that usually takes me about 2 hours maximum. Then I let that sit, and then I sleep on it. And if I come up with any ideas in the morning, sometimes I come up with a major idea, but usually it's just a word here and there, or adding another panel or taking a panel out, something like that. So it's really you might say it's a 3-day process for a 6-page story, but most of the time I'm doing something else. And it's very little time is actually spent writing.
So is it usually you come up with the title first or the cover art is given to you?
Usually, with these horror stories I've been doing, it's either one or the other, usually. There have been times where I've come up with an idea of, hey, let's use Jesse James in a story. And I don't know what the story is going to be or what the title is going to be or anything. I just know I've got to do some research on Jesse James. And then I find out all these things about his life and career. Hey, this will fit right in. Like I opened up the the Wild Bill Hickok story with him getting assassinated. The first panel, I got 3 panels at the top. This hasn't been published yet. 3 panels at the top of him in Deadwood, the town of Deadwood, saying goodbye to Calamity Jane, his girlfriend, and I got to go to this poker game, but be careful. She says, remember your eyesight's starting to fail. I know. And so the big splash panel, which is that big panel you always see on the first page, it's Bill Hickok from the back sitting there, and Jack McCall ready to fire, pulling the hammer back, ready to shoot him in the back of the head with the dead man's hand he's holding. That's the way it opened. And then that went to him being zapped away by aliens. It's called Angels, Aces and Aliens, as opposed to Aces and Eights. So I thought of that scene of Wild Bill Hickok. Then I had to do some research on Wild Bill Hickok. I did one with Frank Nitti the other day, and it's already out. I think it might be in the current issue, where Frank Nitti is being stalked by a vampire that he inadvertently created, and he calls up Elliot Ness, his main enemy with the Untouchables, to help him get out of this jam. And Elliot Ness, who can't stand Frank Nitti, is no longer in the Untouchables. He's already getting ready to leave for Pennsylvania, wherever he went. And I had to research all the stuff about Frank Nitti. All I knew was what I saw in the TV shows and in the movie. But I love doing that research. I love the stories where I can put in a historical character that I have to do some looking up on. And those are what I get the most pleasure out of, the most satisfaction. But all in 6 pages.
And this is work you did, you said 1979?
1979.
Wow.
Work for hire. One-shot story done as kind of a joke.
And was that an opportunity that was an interesting thing where someone else might have turned it down, or no, this was something that you were doing on a regular
this
basis?
was just I was at another party at Rick Oberg's, the artist house, and the artist was there. I mean, the editor, Roy Thomas, was there, and Rick and I were just kind of come up with all these crazy ideas for potential what-if stories. And I don't even know who came up with the idea. I think it was me. I said, what if the hammer was found by Jane Foster? And we were having a couple of drinks, we were a little bit loose, coming up with crazier and crazy ideas. And we went up to Roy and said, hey, what do you think of this? Because he turned down a bunch of the ones we came up with. And he said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Run with it. So the next day I was busy working out the story. And see, at Marvel, the way you wrote a story was different. Every company had their own method. When I'm working now, doing these Shudder and Vampirella Carmilla stories, you write a script like a movie script, pretty much. You describe everything and give everybody dialogue. When I worked at Gold Key Comics, it was more. You got sat down with a sheet, because they were used to working with cartoonists. So you got a sheet of paper, and you ruled off with a ruler where the panels would go, and then you would write in each rectangle or square what was going on. And if you went off beyond the line, you got too much on the page. With Marvel, you would talk to the artist, you would write up a synopsis. The synopsis might be 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs, and you give it to the artist, and the artist would draw it up any way he wants. And then you would get the art back, and you would get these penciled, like a fight that would go on for 4 pages, where in your synopsis all you write was, they fight. And artists came up with all that. And then you write all the balloons and the captions and the sound effects over the artwork. And then the inker and the letterer would come in, they would letter the artwork and ink in the artwork, and then color it. So it was like working backwards in a way. So each company had their own way of doing it.
With the dialogue that you submit, is the artwork then matched exactly page by page, frame by frame?
Well, that's a really good question. And a lot of writers don't understand it, or artists. When you write a regular script in script form, you don't know where you don't see any artwork. It's not done yet. When you do it the Gold Key fashion, you would get the script, and before the artwork was even done, they would draw in balloons, and the artist would have to work around where the balloons were to fit the artwork in. Marvel style, which is the easiest way, I thought, when you wrote a synopsis, And then they sent you the penciled artwork, and there's no artwork, there's no inks yet, and there's no dialogue, and there's no text at all. Then you write the text to fit the artwork. And first of all, the artist has to leave you room to put text someplace. Then you've got to put the artwork, the text, so the reader reads it in the correct sequence. You can't have a question asked here and the answer asked someplace over here with something in between where there's somebody's talking. It's got to follow. You got to follow it like you're a conversation. And then you as a writer have to place, taking all that into account, you have to place the balloons and things so it doesn't cover up an important piece of artwork. You don't want to have a character who's talking have the balloon over his face. It's got to be from some dead space or whatever. That's a trick. It took me a while to learn that. And a lot of artists and writers don't know how to do that. It's just a knack you pick up after a while.
So you're seeing the artwork already laid out?
Yeah, when you work for Marvel, except they have done on occasion script, writing a full script. Generally at Marvel, you write a synopsis, and it might be Captain America fights Doctor Doom for possession of a magic thing of some sort. During the fight, Captain America loses his shield. Very general things like that. Then what you get, usually in the old days, it was in the mail, it came in the mail in a big envelope like this, was the artwork penciled on big sheets of some kind of board, and then you would write your script. You might see a panel that looks really great by itself. Why ruin it with putting dialogue in? Let's just leave it as is. And you don't know until you see the artwork. Then they send it back, and it gets lettered, and then an inker comes in and he inks it. And it's a way of being able to mass produce these things like on an assembly line. While one person is lettering it, the other person is writing it, somebody else is drawing it. And you can work a lot faster that way. The only time in recent years, recent decades actually, that it was actually a thrill seeing my name on anything for something I'd done. There's a new movie that just came out called Thor, Love and Thunder. It's based on the idea that Dr. Don Blake, who traditionally became Thor in the comic books, didn't, that it was actually his nurse and girlfriend, Jane Foster, who became Thor. That was inspired by a comic book story that I wrote and that artist Rick Hoberg drew in 1979 for a Marvel comic called What If? And we coming up with all these silly ideas. What if Spider-Man had two heads or something, And one of them was, what if Jane Foster found the hammer of Thor and became Thor? It was a one shot, never intended to go beyond that one issue of What If, and thought it was kind of a half joke. Well, in recent years, somebody picked up on that idea in the comic books, in the Marvel comics, and it's become part of the mainstream continuity to the extent where they decided to make a movie out of this, hundreds of millions of dollar movie. Well, Marvel was really good. Marvel remembered Rick Hoberg and myself for this. They invited us to the screen, the world premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater. We got to walk the red carpet and all that. And they paid us, I won't say how much, but they paid us very handsomely. And they didn't have to do this. Remember, this is a work for hire. The storyline was almost nothing of what I came up with, except the ending was a little bit the same. But it was mostly, they just took the idea of Jane Foster becoming Thor. That was it. And we're sitting there at Grauman's Chinese Theater, looking at the IMAX screen, and our name comes up at the end in the end credits. That was a big deal. That was a really big deal. So I'm grateful. I'm really thankful to Marvel for doing that. People who worked for the companies like Marvel and DC and always complaining they were ripped off, never remembered, never given any money, never given any credit. And I got to say, Marvel came through for us. We didn't even ask him. I asked him at one point, is it possible this will ever happen, that we'll get some kind of recognition out of this? And all they said was, we'll see, we'll get back to you. And they got back to us in a very nice way. So I'm really grateful and thankful. And seeing your name on the IMAX screen at Grauman's Chinese Theater with all the footprints outside in the front lobby was a big deal.
What's more important to story, the hero or the villain?
I think the villain is usually more colorful. The hero can be very bland. Without the villain, you don't have a hero. You got to give the hero something to do that he can triumph over at the end. You don't want the villain to be. I mean, people say that. I would like to see the villain win for a change, but they don't. It would leave them unfulfilled, unsatisfied, missing something. And a hero can be pretty. He can be pretty boring, actually. But if you give him heroic things to do, that sort of livens him up. But the villain can be outrageous, and flamboyant, way over the top. And a hero can't really do that unless you're doing a satire or a lampoon or something.
How does the villain reflect the hero?
Well, some characters like Batman and the Joker, a lot of people point out they're really kind of reflections of each other. One is they're both obsessive, they both go to no ends, but they're on yin and yang. Frankenstein's monster and Victor Frankenstein is created is looked at the same way, kind of like two personifications, Jekyll and Hyde, where Jekyll and Hyde is all in the same person. I think that's true to a lot of heroes, that they are simply, in some ways, fighting themselves.
Would you argue that the antagonist should be twice as strong as the hero?
It's always best to make the antagonist, the villain, the bad guy, who have more advantages than the hero. Either they're physically stronger. In the case of Superman, they were what are we going to do? He can do anything. Nothing can stop him. That's when they came up with the idea for kryptonite on the old Superman radio show. And then Lex Luthor was this evil genius. So he made up in brains what Superman made up in physical attributes. Yeah, because you don't want to have a hero that can just punch the guy and that's the end of it. And you got to give him adversaries that are either smarter or more powerful than he or she happens to be. Give them challenges that are, even like in Greek mythology and everything, when the heroes go on these odysseys and things, they would have to be up against things that were greater than they were. Otherwise, they're not really so much as the hero, they're more of just a bully, and there's a big difference.
How would you teach me to write an antagonist?
Well, I think I learned how to write heroes and antagonists just by having a huge background of reading a lot, seeing a lot of movies, seeing a lot of television shows, listening to our radio shows, reading mythology, and I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell. There was a series years ago on PBS that who was it? Bill
Moyer.
Yeah,
right?
Bill Moyer moderated that was just brilliant, and things about symbolism and things. I read a book on symbolism years ago as an assignment. I was working for a comic book company, and they said, we want you to put as many of these values in as possible. And little things like, if you have the hero in a ship and it's a voyage going to this mysterious land, you should have him, if you can, have him traveling from east to west west to east instead of east to west. Because what that sets up in your mind of the reader, or if you're watching it on a screen, is if you're going east to west, it's contrary to the way you normally read a book. Your eyes go, unless you're from some exotic country or something, your eyes go from left to right. And going against the grain sort of unconsciously puts in your mind the idea of conflict coming up. And I try to do that as much as I can. I was making this werewolf movie, and my producer couldn't understand why I wanted the evil villainess, who was like the queen of the werewolves, to have dark hair, and the innocent virginal, well, not so virginal, but the innocent good girl who gets sucked into her cult or her pack be blonde. I said, it's just like in the old Flash Gordon movie serial where they had Dale Arden, Flash's girlfriend, with blonde hair, and the evil Queen Aura with black hair, which was a complete switch from the comic strip. It was opposite in the comic strip. And I said, that's going to make people accept her more as the villain. It's like in Western movies with the bad guy cowboys with the black hats and the hero with the white hats. The same thing.
Do you spend more time writing the hero or the villain?
Well, when I'm writing a story, I think it all just comes out in the wash. I just, in a linear way, go through the story. And if the villain has more pages or screen time, that's the way the plot worked out. I don't self-consciously think about it. I have more fun with the villains, of course. They get to say a lot more outrageous things and do a lot more outrageous things. And a lot of times the hero is doing things defensively because it's the villain who's initiating the mayhem or creating the threat. So the villains are always more fun.
Why is evil important in storytelling?
Well, without evil, and again, if you want to distill that a little bit, just say negativity is as important in stories, because without it, your story doesn't really work unless you're writing just some goody two-shoe that's going to be on one of the cable networks, that doesn't have any conflict in it. You got to have good versus evil. I mean, that goes back to morality plays, Greek mythology. It's just drama. It's what drama is all about: good versus evil, or at least conflict. If it's a story about a school teacher or a school principal, and it's a school base, he's got to have some kind of a opposition, whether it's the school's going to be closed down, he's got to raise money, some kind of a challenge, something to do to become heroic.
What are your favorite hero versus villain battles?
One, you mean like in movies and things?
Yeah, or in a comic book.
One of my favorite movie battles of hero against villain. I don't think villainy has been ever I mean, sure, you can have movies of Hitler doing horrible things, but I'm turning just personality villainy and personality heroics was the climactic sword fight between Errol Flynn as Robin Hood and Basil Rathbone as Sir Guy of Ginsburg or whatever that was. That fight was just, and it wasn't that involved. It was a sword fighting up and down these stairs, or down these stairs, I forget which it was. And also this fight between Zorro, as played by Tyrone Power, and Basil Rathbone again in the Mark of Zorro. Those are perfect fights. They end with the hero winning. They don't leave you up in the air, like some of the science fiction movies now. The hero, they just leave you open-ended. And to me, that's not the way the hero and villain should be. There's a scene in the original, or the Boris Karloff Frankenstein, too, where the monster and his creator confront each other out in the mountains, and they just stare at each other. And that moment, even though nothing is happening in it, you just know there's the conflict between if you want to call the Frankenstein, Henry Frankenstein, a heroic figure. At least he's trying to destroy the monster he created. you know. But that look that the two of them exchange is wonderful.
Do most viewers or readers identify with the villain or the hero?
I don't know who I identify with. I like to say I identify with the hero, and I like in the novel Frankenstein though, where everybody identifies with the monster because they're going through this awkward period of their teenage years and all this. They're misunderstood and everything. I was asked by the BBC once. I was doing an interview for them on Frankenstein, and they asked me about identifying with the monster, and I thought about it. I said, "Wait a minute! I never identified with the monster. I identified with Victor, who created the monster, even though he's a vile character in the book. The reason being, he actually did some things. He actually made some things. I mean, what he created got out of hand, but he did it. And ever since I was a kid, I liked to make things. I like to see things being from start to finish being created. That's really, I love to tell stories. I love to make, with crafts and things. And I was always doing that sort of thing. So I think in that one case, where people consider the monster put upon and all those, I mean, and Victor Frankenstein being the actual villain in that story, I guess I identified with the villain in that story.